Great, welcome everyone. We're going to give it just about 30 seconds or so before we get started, but thank you for joining us. Great, yes, if people want to say hello in the chat, that's great. We'll give it just about 20 or 30 more seconds before we get started. It's great, we have folks from all over. It's wonderful. Great. Hi, everybody. This is Sarah Gallagher. I am a senior project director here at NLIHC for the ERASE project, Ending Rental Arrears to Stop Evictions. And it's great to see you all today virtually and to see you saying hello in the chat. Some familiar faces as well as some new faces. So welcome, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us today. This is a second of our webinar in our three-part series on ending rental arrears to stop evictions. And today's webinar is titled Accessible, Creating Flexible, Streamlined, and Low Barrier Application Processes. And today we're going to cover strategies that state and local programs can incorporate into their program design to support flexible, streamlined, and low barrier application processes that will ultimately facilitate access and the disbursement of financial support to both landlords and tenants in time to prevent an eviction and housing loss. So it's great to have you here today. Before we get started, I did want to cover a few logistics for our time together. Our session is being recorded, and the recording, the notes and slides will be available and posted on the website later this week, and we will send them out to everyone at the close of the series. Everyone except for panelists is in participant mode, so that means you cannot unmute yourself, but we do want this to be as interactive as possible. So please share your thoughts, experiences, insights in the chat, and be sure to post your questions for our speakers in the Q&A section of our Zoom call today. Next slide. And keep all of the introductions going in the chat. I love seeing where everybody's from and who's with us. So today we have a very robust agenda. We are going to hear from NLIHC's own Rebecca Yeh on providing an overview of features for accessible programs and applications. We're going to hear from Claire Stanley from the National Disabilities Rights Network to talk about considerations on ensuring accessible application processes, particularly for people living with disabilities. And then our panel discussion will provide an on-the-ground examples of how programs are supporting flexible, streamlined, and low-barrier application processes. And that will be moderated again by our own Kim Johnson. As always, we'll take questions at the end of each session and hope to have plenty of time to have questions at the end. Next slide. So before we jump into our content today, we wanted to share and make sure everyone was aware of the latest update from the CDC and the new moratorium. As you hopefully heard, the CDC has put out a new temporary moratorium in place until October 3rd, 2021. And this new this order will temporarily halt evictions in counties with heightened levels of community transition of COVID. The order is a response to the recent and unexpected developments in the trajectory of COVID-19, particularly the rise of the Delta variant. And it's really intended to target specific areas of the country where cases are rapidly increasing. If there were evictions, the pandemic would be exacerbated in those communities. So this order, it covers individuals who are residing in counties with heightened levels of community transmissions. And like past moratoriums, it's intended for individuals who have used their best efforts to gain available government assistance, individuals who have incomes less than $99,000, or for individuals or if you're filing jointly, $198,000. Individuals who are not able to pay rent due to loss of income, but had used best efforts to make partial payments. And then lastly, for individuals who would be at risk for homelessness or forced to be shared or congregate settings if eviction took place. It should be noted with this new moratorium that people who have already submitted declarations would be covered and would not have to submit a new declaration with this new moratorium. And you'll see here a link, and we'll put one in the chat, to the declaration forms that we have that are available in 20 different languages. Next slide. With the new order, the CDC has provided a link to a map that shows which communities are experiencing substantial and high rates of transmission, which will be extremely useful as we move forward with this and into October. Because it should be noted that new communities can be added if they begin to experience substantial rates of transmission. So this is a more fluid list and will respond to rates of transmission as they change across the country. But it should also be noted that communities will no longer be eligible once they've stopped experiencing substantial or high rates of transmission for 14 days. So we may see counties coming in and off the list as we go forward. We will keep you in the loop of developments as they come and with more information. So next slide, great. So, but even with this new moratorium in place, which we are extremely excited about and think it will have great impact, we still want to make sure that programs are working to make sure emergency assistance gets to those most in need, particularly, and we're creating infrastructure before October. NLIHC has pulled together our Treasury guidance, emerging research, best practice, and talking to local state partners to develop a framework that will assist state partners, jurisdictions, and ERA program administrators to ensure assistance gets out the door quickly to those most in need, and will develop the infrastructure for scale and sustainability. This is our ERASE call to action. The ERASE call to action, it focuses on 3 key areas that we feel will have the greatest impact on programs, and ensuring that programs are visible, they're accessible, and they're preventive. So as you may have heard in past webinars, but as a refresher, we want all programs to be visible, and that they're conducting equitable and robust marketing and outreach efforts to ensure that all landlords and low-income renters and those already experiencing homelessness know about ERA and have the ability to access it in their community. The programs should support equitable access and disbursement, and they should be streamlined, low barrier application processes. And lastly, they should be preventive. Programs must ensure holistic, responsive interventions at all intersection points. They should be engaging state and local courts to prevent evictions and housing displacement, and also integrating tenant protections into a well-rounded eviction diversion prevention strategy. As to support these 3 areas of our framework, NLIHC has developed a series of checklists designed to make a quick assessment of emergency rental assistance programs, to help lay out attributes for program models, and to offer strategies for implementation, partnership development, and course correction if needed. And we'll put a link to those checklists in the chat, and we'll be talking a little bit more about them later on in this call. So while my colleague Rebecca will provide an overview of many of the components for model programs, I wanted to highlight one aspect of the checklist here that is crucial, especially as we go forward in the next few months. So I want to highlight the need to ensure that programs are, that there's multiple streamlined ways for people to access assistance. households most in need and with multiple barriers must really be able to access emergency rental assistance at the time when they need it most. And households may need to be offered assistance at multiple points in time and by providers they trust at different points and at different places. The following chart, the chart below, outlines some of the intervention points that may be where we may want to make emergency rental assistance available. They really cover the intervention points from the onset of a financial crisis all the way up to potential housing loss. And these are all points where someone may want to access emergency rental assistance. It's really important to keep these intervention points in mind as we have our discussion today, because you'll want to make sure that applications and processes are flexible and they may need to look and function differently depending on where in the process you're providing assistance, where the landlord or the tenant might be asking for assistance, or you may be providing assistance. So for example, if someone has a financial crisis early on and you're engaging with a health center or financial counseling, you might want to do direct referrals to ERA and be able to streamline documentation practices. If someone's already in court, there might be opportunities to use data to identify if a landlord has received full payout, and you can stop an eviction from moving forward. Or you can fast track an application for a new application that happens in the court so that you have timely payment so that the filing doesn't have to go any further. If someone is already experiencing potential housing loss, you might want to be coordinating with your COC, your coordinated entry, and having enhanced homeless diversion efforts, and so that you can really coordinate and prevent that entry into shelter or into homelessness. Or you might want to focus on rehousing efforts and really helping someone find a new apartment or new home at that time. So really ensuring as we're talking today that you're thinking about the different points of intervention and how you might want to tailor your process to those different points of intervention. So with that said, I will now turn this webinar over to Rebecca to provide us with information on model features to support accessible programs. Rebecca, I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca Yeh. I'll be talking a little bit about, what we've learned about emergency rental assistance programs so far, where things are today and where we need to go. So NLIHC has been tracking emergency rental assistance programs that have been created or expanded in response to COVID-19 for over a year now. And we've also been doing research on this with our partners at Housing Initiative at Penn and NYU Furman Center. I'm going to go over just a few quick key learnings that we've learned about emergency rental assistance programs this past year or so. Next slide, please. These would include programs that were based in CARES Act funds. So the scale of funds was a little bit different, but really still demonstrate a wide variety of challenges and strategies to overcome those challenges. Next slide, please. In the fall of last year, we conducted a survey of 220 program administrators using CARES Act. And one of our main research questions was, how do key program design features correlate with outcomes? And we found that jurisdictions that partnered with local nonprofits were particularly effective at getting funds to renters in need. So partnering with local groups is really important. We also found that certain requirements, such as proof of COVID-19 related income losses, tended to result in incomplete applications and likely slowed programs down. So programs really need to create a simple, accessible application and use self-attestation to expedite their processes. Next slide, please. We also conducted some follow-up case study interviews with 15 of the programs that we surveyed. And in our survey interviews, we asked, what strategies have program administrators used to improve their programs or adapt to the challenges that they faced? And we found that program administrators adopted a variety of tactics. So many increased documentation flexibility, including using self-attestation, expanding flexibility around documents that tenants could use to show income or hardship, and more. We also found that adapting the program to deeply consider and center targeted population groups really helped programs to determine what to ask from applicants in the actual application. And then on a similar line, tracking tenant characteristics and program data were also really important. That data could help programs to identify where they could improve and adjust. So for example, who were they including in their programs, who were they missing, and where the programs would need to do more work and adjust. Landlord engagement was also crucial in many programs, but at the end of the day, some landlords simply won't participate in a federal program. And so several programs worked around this and paid tenants directly, as they felt that tenants shouldn't be penalized for their landlord's non-participation, and in some cases to support future housing stability, they supported tenants with relocation assistance as well. So all of these learnings from the programs from last year have really come to take some form in more recent Treasury guidance, especially with Treasury's strong discouragement of excess documentation requirements and provision of new ways to circumvent income source documentation, as well as the requirement to provide direct-to-tenant assistance with ERA2. Next slide, please. So just as a refresher on what exactly is in the guidance, as there have been a number of good revisions to the guidance since the first draft came out in January. And also make a side note here that here I'll be referring to, ERA refers to emergency rental assistance, both from the December Consolidated Appropriations Act, as well as the March Reconciliation Bill. And ERA1 refers specifically to the funds that were passed in December, and ERA2 refers to the funds in the American Rescue Plan Act. So Treasury strongly discourages burdensome documentation requirements and has offered documentation alternatives like the use of self-attestation, categorical eligibility, and fact-specific proxies to qualify tenants without source documentation. Treasury also requires direct-to-tenant assistance when landlords are non-responsive or refuse to respond in ERA2. And programs are allowed to actually pay tenants first with ERA2 without going to landlords. Treasury additionally reduced the timeline to 7 days when reaching out by mail and 5 days when reaching out by phone, text, or email. Guidance has also made very clear that tenants with federal rent subsidies or living in federally subsidized housing may receive assistance, and excluding tenants with federal rent subsidies is prohibited with ERA2. Importantly, Treasury requires programs to implement tenant eviction protections when payments are made to landlords as a condition of their payment contract. And Treasury also kind of goes a step further, encouraging grantees to take this on more and provide eviction protections for 30 to 90 days after the payment period. And the last thing I'll mention here is the guidance has made very clear that the program can indeed serve people currently experiencing homelessness. Next slide, please. So almost all grantees with the Treasury Emergency Rental Assistance Funds from the December Consolidated Appropriations Act are actively administering their local ERA programs. And we recently started tracking spending using a combination of Treasury monthly updates, dashboards from programs that are communicating their progress kind of independently, and then also using information from news clippings. And our latest estimates from earlier this week are putting us at around $3.6 billion approved or distributed to tenant households. And assuming that programs have used the maximum allowed funds for administrative costs, that puts us at approximately 16% of ERA1 funds that have been approved or distributed. So this distribution process of getting the money out the door has been painfully slow so far, though there are some programs that are really hitting their stride. Getting money out the door is one metric of how well programs are doing, and we're going to take a look at some key program features to just get another sense of how well programs are doing. So next slide, please. The NLIHC dashboard tracks key program design features based on publicly available information. Even though reducing documentation is a best practice, we're not necessarily seeing that communicated on programs' web pages or FAQs. Right now, only approximately 55% of programs explicitly state that they allow for self-attestation, and only 27% explicitly allow for direct-to-tenant assistance. Our most recent report with the University of Pennsylvania's Housing Initiative at Penn and NYU Furman Center indicated that some programs that self-reported using self-attestation or direct-to-tenant assistance in the survey didn't actually have publicly available information indicating that they were using or allowing for self-attestation or direct-to-tenant assistance. So this really clearly shows that emergency rental assistance programs need to be more communicative and transparent on their policies and procedures. Tenants and people who are assisting tenants fill out these applications should be able to see clearly that tenants can self-attest, or that there are possible outcomes if landlords refuse to participate. All of which is to say, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done to ensure that these funds are getting to households in need. Next slide, please. It's really imperative that programs get funding out the door quickly. Luckily, the eviction moratorium has been extended in some form, but there's still a looming deadline in the not too distant future. And so there are a couple of things that programs can do to kind of check themselves. So making sure that the application is simple, short, and usable. So making sure that the program's application uses plain language and not using jargon. Making sure that the application is available in multiple modes, so online, mobile, on your mobile phone, by phone, so calling some sort of hotline and accessing the application that way, or in person. Programs also really need to reduce the documentation burden and only ask for the bare minimum. So to spell that out, sticking to only asking for eligibility around COVID hardship, risk of housing instability or homelessness, income, and lease. On top of reducing eligibility kind of stringency, programs really need to adopt alternatives to source documents. So programs should be using self-attestation for income, COVID hardship, and showing rental obligation as the guidance allows. Programs should also look into using categorical eligibility and fact-specific proxies if they aren't already. And then lastly, programs should ensure that tenants in a wide variety of situations can access emergency rental assistance. So making sure that programs use direct-to-tenant assistance, as there are always going to be some landlords who won't participate, and tenants shouldn't be penalized for that. In addition, programs should provide relocation assistance and forward rent to provide help to folks who've already been evicted or are currently experiencing homelessness. The only other thing I'll mention here is that, there's really a need and to push for willingness to adapt. So this is really a learning journey. We've learned a lot so far, and programs need to kind of be constantly checking in and learning and modifying their programs to make sure that they're working smoothly and can work better. So a capacity to change is really important. And to get some other kind of concrete ideas on what other actions you can take or with your program administrators or advocate for, you can look at our Erase call to action and see how you can help ensure that ERA programs are visible, accessible, and preventive. So altogether, these are some of the strategies that are really important to helping programs more effectively serve tenants, to make sure that they're accessible to tenants. And then next slide, please. I'm just gonna quickly go over a couple of quick resources just in case you haven't seen them. If you're looking for an emergency rental assistance program near you or want to help get the word out in your neighborhood, you can check out our emergency rental assistance program locator. And I think that's people will be dropping things into the chat as well, these links into the chat. Next slide. You can also find out if your ERA program is using best practices at our dashboard. Next slide, please. And lastly, if your ERA program is not using best practices, help connect your program administrators and advocates to best practices at our resource hub. And with that, I am going to pass it on to Claire Stanley with the National Disabilities Rights Network. And Claire is going to be talking a little bit more on how programs can ensure accessible application processes for tenants with disabilities.
Great, thank you so much. So hi everybody, like was said, my name is Claire Stanley and I'm a public policy analyst with the National Disability Rights Network. And I love that we're using the word accessible here. I think for a lot of people, when you hear accessible, it means, you know, can you access it? Like we just heard, but in the disability space, accessible really has its own word or its own meaning, I should say. And that means, is it usable and accessible for people with disabilities? You know, you think of accessible parking. So as my first slide says, are these programs accessible to people with disabilities? So this can look like many things. It can be physical access. You know, if your program where people can go for the emergency rental assistance is in a building without a ramp or an elevator, people can't get there. That's, you know, the most common thing we think of when we think about disability access, but a lot of it is web-based now. If your website's not accessible, yeah, it's blocking a whole community of people from getting there. Are your services offered in different ways so that people with intellectual disabilities can interact? So we really need to think like a whole broad swath of ideas to make sure that people with disabilities can access these services. And I do want to put out there too, it's not just the person, the tenant, it could also be the owner of the building. If they have a disability, can they get this information? One of the persons who first spoke today talked about making this information visible. Are we making it out there, putting it out there so that both tenants and landlords know that these programs are available? In order to do that for people with disabilities, we need to have it on websites that are accessible, put them in publications that people with disabilities are going to access. You know, if you just have it on a billboard, you could be missing a whole community of people. So we really need to think broadly about how things are accessible, both for the tenant, the landlord, to even know that the program exists altogether. So next slide. So I'm going to talk briefly about the two main laws that we need to think about that persons have to cover. So yes, you should want to make your program accessible because it's the right thing to do, but also I'm here to tell you it's legally required. So the main law I'm going to talk about is the Americans with Disabilities Act, specifically Title II, but the other law that also applies is the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. These two laws are very similar. At its most basic level, it says you have to make things accessible for people with disabilities. The difference is that the Rehab Act applies to anything that gets federal funding. This is federal funding, thus it applies. Title II applies for anything that exists at a state or county or local level. And so that's a lot of these programs. So as you can see, these programs, the emergency rental assistance programs, check both of those boxes. So you need to comply with Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA for short, as well as the Rehab Act of '73. So what is Title II require / the Rehab Act? You have to provide reasonable accommodations. And in the disability space, we always want to emphasize that the word reasonable is important. People can't, ask for the sky and get whatever they want. It has to be reasonable. But you do have to provide accommodations that are going to enable people to access the services that you provide. So again, in this situation, the service that these entities are providing is access to apply for these emergency rental assistance programs. So are you enabling people to go in physically, online, speak with the person, however your entity might do it? You have to enable them to get access to that. Another thing to know with reasonable accommodations is no one size fits all. If you met one person with a disability, you've met one person with a disability. So don't just assume, oh, we once had a blind individual apply for emergency rental assistance, I know exactly what to do, or we'll do the same thing. The Americans with Disabilities Act and Rehab Act specifically say that it's on an individualized basis because people's disabilities are different and people are different. So I want to talk briefly about kind of what made my ears perk up here at the National Disability Rights Network. The National Disability Rights Network is an entity that oversees 57 different protection and advocacy agencies. All of your states and the territories have them. There are 57 of them. And they're basically, I often say they're akin to legal aid, but they deal with disability rights issues. And so at one of our conferences this year, we took an informal poll and said, hey, are you guys seeing access issues for the ERAP programs in your states or counties? And several people virtually raised their hand and talked about some of the different issues they're seeing. So for instance, I reached out to one of the protection and advocacy offices in California. So shout out to Californians. And one of the attorneys told me they kind of did their own little informal investigation to see what some of the access issues were for their county and state programs. They said things like the websites weren't accessible. So people who are blind or visually impaired couldn't access the materials online to, one, learn about the programs, and two, to apply for the programs. Another thing, just the good old fashioned phone that we all, have used our whole lives. If you were deaf or hard of hearing, you weren't able to walk through the system. It didn't comply with what we call TTY, which is a service for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. So those persons couldn't even just pick up the phone old fashioned. And there's so many other accommodations I want to emphasize today, but those were a few of them. Before I move on to the next slide, I just wanted to talk about a few other types of accommodations. I know it's popular now. I've heard people talk about kiosks where people could walk up and apply for these programs via kiosk. That's great. That's a great idea. Is it accessible for people with disabilities? If you're blind, you might not be able to use a kiosk. If you have a learning disability, the same thing. So we want to make sure that for everything that's available, we have alternatives. Like Rebecca just talked about, we want duplicity, so that there are multiple options to accommodate different disabilities. Also, if you have a resource, you need to always make sure you have a human being there to offer assistance, because that's always an accommodation that's needed. But if you have an individual person there helping, you need to remember privacy. I've seen sometimes with things like kiosks or websites, they'll just say, oh, have the stranger next to you help you. No, that's violating their privacy. That is not a reasonable accommodation. And we want people who are trained to know what they're doing when they're helping people. And the last thing I'll say before I go to the next slide is one form of accommodation that's really important that actually came up, I believe, by Rebecca already, was the idea of plain language. This means that any literature that you give out, which I'm going to go over a legal requirement in a minute, has to be readable for all people, people with intellectual or developmental disabilities, or IDD as we call it. So it's really popular now to have materials in plain language, meaning they're written at a lower grade level so that everybody can understand it. And let's be honest, that's not just helpful for the IDD community, that's helpful for everybody, especially when we're in these really anxious times now and you have to fill out so much paperwork. I think everybody would agree that that's helpful. So that's an idea of universal design that's helpful. So next slide. Again, just throwing some legal terms at you, but under the Americans with Disabilities Act, you have to have auxiliary aids and services. And auxiliary aids and services just means that if you're communicating with the public, it has to be done in an accessible way. We often think of auxiliary aids and services as spoken or impersonal communication, which is definitely a huge part that I want to talk about, but it's also written materials. And I wanted to stress this because so much of these applications are a written process, right? You're filling out tons of paperwork. So you need to make sure that you comply with the auxiliary aids and services components of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So for this, you are talking about effective communication. If you want to do the buzzword in the legal community, it's effective communication under the ADA. So again, it could be actual spoken communication. If someone who is deaf or hard of hearing who comes into a physical location, you have to provide an ASL interpreter if they request it. It's their job to request it. If they do, you have to provide it. You can't just say, oh, we'll scribble down on a pad, paper and pad. Nope, you have to provide an ASL interpreter if it's requested, if it's a reasonable accommodation request. If they come in with their child, let's say, and their child speaks ASL, nope, that does not count. You have to provide the ASL interpreter. A child is not a legal, proxy, that's not permitted. But again, also with written materials. So people are going to be using lots and lots of written materials. So if someone has low vision, let's say, and they need a copy of their material in large print, they have every right to request that. So you need to have that. Plain language, again, is an important one for people with intellectual or developmental disabilities, things like that. So you have to really think outside the box. Again, when people have disabilities, it's no one size fits all. So you think, okay, we have a policy set in place for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, we're covered. That's one great example, please do it. There are companies out there, firms that employ ASL interpreters, have that written down somewhere, have a contract with the firm already so you don't have to scramble for it last minute. That's a great example of auxiliary aids and services. It is not the only one. The next slide. I just really wanted to emphasize websites because it's 2021. We do everything over websites. It's just our bread and butter. And so I don't want to assume wrongly, but I'm assuming that many of your programs for ERA use websites to apply. Website accessibility is both a blessing and a curse for people with disabilities because it opens the door for so many people who, one, might physically not be able to get to a location, might not be able to usually read written paperwork because they're blind, but their computer will read it to them, things like that. It can open the door, but it can also slam it shut if you design your website incorrectly. And so a lot of this comes down to the way the website is designed. People who are blind, for instance, use screen reading software. So if it's not if it doesn't interact well with the screen reading software, people aren't going to be able to use it. It's just going to shut down. This is things, for instance, if you just have graphics and pictures, we need text. If you have things like flashing lights, it could trigger a seizure. If you have tons of video clips with no captioning for people who are deaf. Again, plain language for people with intellectual disabilities. There's something out there called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. Now, this is a little kind of an interesting tangent, but under Section 508 of the Rehab Act, again, the one that gets federal dollars, so that comes into play, there are website requirements. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Department of Justice has not yet promulgated regulations. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are not a promulgated piece of regulations that the US has officially adopted, but it's something that's widely respected and a lot of lawsuits, the courts have applied it. So it's just a good resource. So Google WCAG and you'll find a good list of examples on how to make things accessible. So again, just don't want to to minimize it, websites are huge. Next slide. I won't spend a ton on this telephone accessibility because I've already talked about this. But again, we live in an age where, a lot of people still want to pick up the phone. Disability Rights California told us that somebody who used TTY tried to call and got the, push 4 if you want to talk to a human being. And with the TTY operator, they didn't have enough time to hit 4 and they were just kicked off the call. We want to make sure this doesn't happen. The next slide. I just have a list of resources I'll go through really quickly. First, the US Department of Justice has a hotline that anybody can call. It's totally anonymous. You're not going to get in trouble if you say something and they say, we caught you, you violated the ADA. That's not what this is. It's a hotline that you can call and just ask any question. Their website is www.ada.gov. They have tons of written resources on there. Use them, call their hotline. It's a great resource. And then the other one is through something called the ADA National Network. There are 10 regional offices throughout the US. If you call their hotline, they'll just bump you over to the closest one. And again, just like the DOJ, it's completely anonymous. If you tell them, I don't think I'm compliant, you're not going to get in trouble. They're purely an informational line to answer your questions. They're not a legal entity. So don't say, if I did what they said, I'm legally covered. It's not that. It's just an informational resource, but they have great experts who know what they're talking about. And same if you go to ADATA for technicalassistance.org, they have tons and tons and tons of materials on there to do the same. Their website, or excuse me, their phone number is on the slide, but for access issues, if you need me to read it out, it's 1-800-949-4232. So check out those resources. That's what those people are there to help with, is to make sure that you're making your programs accessible. And then last slide, I just have my information. I'm Claire Stanley. For access reasons, if you can't read the slide, please email me, claire.stanley@ndrn.org. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Claire, for a fabulous presentation. There are many comments in the chat box that are saying that your presentation is really great and very helpful. So I am extremely appreciative that you're pointing out these very important points. And I actually had a question from somebody in the audience. With court appearances no longer being voluntary and since failure to show can result in a default to the tenant, what accommodations or exceptions are being offered to those who don't have access? So for example, the ability to attend through web or Zoom to avoid there being in default for not attending.
So please correct me if I'm not understanding correctly, but are you saying if somebody needs to attend a hearing via web or that kind of thing, if it's not accessible, are they penalized for it?
That is, I think that's my interpretation of the question too.
Yeah, okay, great. I don't want to speak out of turn. So yeah, COVID is definitely a new era with things being done online for obvious reasons. But again, through either the ADA, which is going to be most of the situations when you're dealing with tenant and landlord court in your counties and states, under the ADA, they have to provide reasonable accommodations. So if their court system doesn't have an accessible system for a person to use, they have to make that accommodation. And perhaps if at the end of the day, the court says, we just don't have, an accessible online system, the accommodation might have to be delay it until, things reopen because of COVID. There are a lot of accessible systems out there. There's screen reading software for persons who are blind. There's different types of software for people who have physical disabilities to interact with the computer. So that definitely does exist. So it's definitely doable. Zoom is pretty accessible as we're using today. I'm blind and I'm using Zoom with screen reading software. So it exists, and a court needs to find a way for the people to use that. It can be difficult. Oftentimes you hear courts say, we don't want to do that because it's too difficult and it costs too much money. That's the line you hear a lot. It's too expensive. Well, sorry, under the ADA, you have to provide it. Now, like I said, you don't, when you get a reasonable accommodation, it doesn't mean you get the newest, latest, and greatest, most expensive. So somebody can't make it to the court because they don't have an accessible system. They can't say, bring me the newest Apple computer with the newest, latest, and greatest. You're not necessarily going to get exactly what you want, but they do have to provide something. And like I said, at the end of the day, if they can't do it, and the only way to make it accessible is by postponing the court hearing until they reopen, that could be it. You know, I obviously can't speak for every situation, but they do have to find a way to make it accessible.
Do you have any tips for, so the person who wrote in the question left a comment that I'm afraid the request to reasonably accommodate might come after they've already missed the hearing and have already ended up in an eviction. Do you have any tips or actions you'd recommend?
Ooh, that's a really good, difficult question. I'll use word unfortunately for lack of a better word. In order to get an accommodation for something, you always have to request it beforehand. So, you know, we'll use the example where I'll put it in a school situation. If you're a university student and you have a disability and you take a final and you never ask for accommodations, and then unfortunately you fail the final, you can't then turn around and say, oh, I needed accommodations. It's too late. You had to ask beforehand. So in this situation, it would be similar. Now, of course, if there's an appeals process for the tenant court, then that second time around, you could say, wait, now I need accommodations. But if you didn't ask for accommodations in the first place, and as a result, you had negative consequences, unfortunately, it's not a retroactive process.
Thank you for sharing that. That is really horrible. I'll tackle kind of one more question, as I know that we're already running a little bit behind. There have been a couple of questions around getting more information around using fact-based proxies. So Laura Lean says, we want to do this in Oregon, and Shell says that does anyone have good examples of policies and procedures around using fact-specific proxies? So I'll be able to offer a couple of examples. So the state of Kentucky has started to implement a zip code-based fact-specific proxy in high-need areas. And I know that the state of Connecticut and the state of Virginia are also implementing fact-specific proxies. So you can email us at, you can email me at ryae@nlihc.org, and we can try to connect. And then I think that I will pass it over to my colleague, Kim Johnson, to introduce our really fabulous panelists today. So Claire, thank you so much for the really fabulous presentation. There have been more comments in the chat box about how your presentation has been wonderful and an excellent reminder, and has provided a lot of valuable information. And I will pass it over to Kim.
Thanks so much, Rebecca, and thank you again, Claire, for that wonderful presentation. And hello, everyone. My name is Kim Johnson. I'm a policy analyst here at NLIHC, and I am delighted to be here with you today to be moderating this panel. So we have 4 incredibly talented advocates with us who are going to share a brief overview of their emergency rental assistance programs, and then we'll dive into a discussion and answer some of your big questions on ERA program accessibility. So first we'll hear from Aaron Hahn, a research analyst with Texas Housers. Then we'll be joined by Verónica Soto, Director of the City of San Antonio's Neighborhood and Housing Services Department. Next, we'll hear from Gregory Zlotnick, Director of Pro Bono Programs at the Center for Legal and Social Justice at St. Mary's University School of Law. And last but certainly not least, we will hear from Aaron Barbie, Senior Vice President of Programs and Fund Development at Key Partners in North Carolina. So I will turn it now to Aaron Hahn from Texas Housers. Aaron, take it away.
Thanks, Kim, and thanks to the NLIHC for having me on today. My name is Aaron Hahn, and I am a research analyst with Texas Housers, a Texas-based nonprofit that advocates for policies and programs that help keep low-income Texans housed. In terms of projects related to the COVID-19 pandemic, Texas Housers tracks the progress of ERA programs across the state and evaluates their ability to prevent evictions based on quantitative data that we obtain from programs directly, as well as qualitative data that we gather from observations made in our Harris County Eviction Court Watch program. But today I'll speak briefly on the quantitative data that we've collected from local ERA programs in Texas and how it reflects upon their application processes in terms of how streamlined they are, or alternatively, how they may be creating barriers. So next slide, please. A few weeks ago, Texas Housers published a report that uses data we received from a sample of the 36 jurisdictions that administer local ERA programs in Texas to evaluate programs' abilities to disperse funds in an efficient and equitable manner. I'll drop a link to the full report in the chat, although I will note at this point in time, the data it's based on is dated by a couple months, and we're in the process of obtaining more information to be able to update this analysis with a second report in coming weeks. But for the sake of today's conversation about the importance of streamlining the ERA application process to reduce barriers and allow for a steady flow of funds to households, I'll highlight just 2 of the programs that were included in the analysis, the cities of San Antonio and Arlington, and compare the level of flexibility that their documentation requirements provide, and illustrate how this flexibility or lack thereof is reflected in data surrounding the program's rates of dispersal and the characteristics of their recipient pools as of mid-May, which is when the data were collected. Next slide, please. And so as we've already seen today, there are a number of strategies that program administrators can adopt to ensure that documentation requirements do not bar the participation of households who may have informal work, banking, or leasing arrangements that are difficult to formally document. So for example, as these screenshots of San Antonio and Arlington's documentation requirements show, San Antonio is willing to accept a range of documents that demonstrate income level, COVID-related hardship, and housing instability. And if none of the given options are accessible to the applicant, it allows them to simply submit a letter that explains their particular situation. Arlington, on the other hand, lists a substantial number of documents that ask to be provided if applicable, and neither offers the range of options nor the opportunity for self-attestation that San Antonio does. And next slide, please. So we can generally expect to see that programs with flexible documentation requirements and a streamlined application process disperse funds much more quickly than those that do not, as shown here with San Antonio. And while a number of factors are likely to contribute to San Antonio's ability to disperse funds at a comparatively high rate, including the advantage it had as a program that existed prior to the pandemic, its flexible documentation requirements can be assumed to play a role in the speed at which it's able to operate. Next slide. And so in addition to slowing down programs' rates of dispersal at large, documentation requirements, like has already been mentioned today, can also determine which populations are represented in programs' recipient pools and which are not. So for example, even though federal guidelines do not exclude undocumented immigrants from the ERA program, many local programs prevent them from participating by requiring applicants to provide a state-issued ID or a social security number. But some programs are attentive to the barriers that particular required documents may set up for undocumented tenants, like San Antonio here, and make it explicit on their application that they are willing to accept an ID that is issued either by the US or another country. And if you go to the next slide, many factors are sure to contribute to San Antonio's success in reaching Hispanic or Latino households, as shown here. such as community outreach efforts in the city's historically low-income Latino West Side that Verónica, also on the call, can speak to much better than me, but its low barrier documentation requirements likely play a contributing role. And so because the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on Black and Latino or Hispanic households, if ERA programs are effectively meeting the need, we would expect to see these groups overrepresented in program recipient pools with respect to their population level in the jurisdiction, as you can see here with San Antonio's program. If either of these groups are underrepresented in program recipient pools, that is a sign that the program is failing to reach a particular community, and administrators should ask questions about whether the application process is creating barriers or its community outreach strategies are lacking. So I'll wrap up here by knowing that this is a simplified 5-minute case study using slightly outdated data to illustrate how flexible documentation requirements increase program rate of dispersal and remove barriers for vulnerable populations. But it echoes the research from the NLIHC and the Urban Institute and others that have found that streamlining the application process greatly improves program efficiency and equity. That's it for me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erin. Really appreciate you joining us today. So we have a few questions that have come in, but before we get to Q&A, we will turn to Verónica Soto from the City of San Antonio. Verónica, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thanks for having San Antonio represented here. I didn't put any slides because I thought Erin did a great job of pointing out some of the things that we in San Antonio have done. And so I just want to share with you a little bit of how we got to that point. First, we are very proud that Texas Housers, an advocacy group, highlighted us as the #1 city in Texas in terms of the metrics they use. How quickly we got money out the door, the fact that we were helping those most impacted African American and Hispanic communities. We didn't score so well on the other metric in terms of the lower income household data. In reality, we are, but we reported just what our program is, which is serving people at or below 80% AMI. But in reality, have we shared all the data, you would see that most of the clients we're serving are indeed families at or below 50% AMI. But how we got there is a factor of things. So I think we had an advantage as the city because we had started to talk about housing as a priority way before the pandemic. And so it was already on our radar. Our department was created with housing services at the forefront. Second, our city government already had been doing what we call our budget equity or equity for budgeting purposes. So the conversation around making sure that we got resources to areas that had been neglected in the past was already ongoing. And so that was something that was already part of our organizational culture, if you will. And our city manager, who's been city manager, I think he got the appointment right before the pandemic. He was already asking us as city staff to use data and a data-driven approach to policy. So he was already making sure that we counted the things that we were doing, that we measured things. And so we had the foundations for developing this program. So I mentioned that San Antonio had housing as a priority. So before the pandemic, we had a program that was about emergency housing assistance. So we already had the foundation, the policy, had spent the time reaching out to vulnerable communities, communities of color, to get their feedback to develop the policy for that program. And this was back in 2019. That laid the foundation for what became our emergency housing assistance program, which we launched in April of 2020. And we knew that once in March, all the stay-at-home orders were in place, all the restaurants, all the hotels, all the events started shutting down, that people were gonna have difficulty making their rental payments and their mortgage payments. We included mortgages in our program, and it's still a commitment for us because we had our initial program back in 2019 that said rent and mortgage, emergency housing assistance out of the general fund would be available. So we had a good head start for the pandemic, and we learned a lot. We were intentional in our design. So that graphic that Erin showed about making sure we said the word matrícula consular, which is a consular ID, was very intentional. Once we knew we had to do this online because we couldn't have in-person interactions, we couldn't do in-person intake, and we knew we had to take this program online to get an application intake, we were very intentional about making sure it was in Spanish. And I'm a Spanish speaker, so I was overseeing all the translations to make sure we were also using the correct terms, not just the Royal Spanish from Spain, but something that even in San Antonio could be understood, the Pocho Spanish, you know, so that someone who spoke Spanglish could get it as well. Very intentional about using matrícula consular, saying, hey, it doesn't have to be an ID issued in the United States. And we had also said we need to make it as simple as possible. We need to make this accessible to people who are stressed, who don't have time, who are trying to figure out how to address this crisis. And we don't want to make it a big old checklist. They don't have the luxury of that time or the luxury of, oh, okay, this is easy to do or not. They're going to decide right away. And the messaging was intentional as well. So we knew all the housing providers, we knew all the community advocates, we didn't know all the immigrant and advocacy groups, but they have become part of our stakeholder group because we didn't want to leave people out. But we were intentional in our design. We were open to hearing from all of them to fix what we did. We didn't get it right the first time. It was okay, but it wasn't just right. And we heard, like, why are you asking that? Do you really need that? You're making it too hard. So we were open to hearing, but also open to changing because we wanted to continue to make it easy. Even now, we're continuing to make it easier for us. And so that was part of the culture. And that's how we got to where we're at. I'm happy to announce this week used up all our ERA 1 money. Yes, that's around $45 million out the door. Probably the first in the nation to use all the ERA money because the city manager said back in July, he said, you're taking too long if it takes 45 days to get money out the door. And that was not acceptable. And he wanted us to innovate and he wanted us to get the money out the door because by the time someone applied, they were already behind. And adding 45 days was just not acceptable. It wasn't acceptable to him, it wasn't acceptable to me, and it was not acceptable to any of our team. It was not acceptable for our community advocates. So that drove us to be open, to change, to listen, to improve, to not be afraid to say, okay, we didn't get it right, we'll change it. And we continue to do that. So with the eviction moratorium, I know we got an extension, but all last month, all our community was doing, our advocates, our staff was being out there and saying, hey, we can do in-person intake now, we'll help you because we want to avoid this crisis if there's a lot of eviction filing. But it was because we had that foundation and we were open to innovation and to listening and we pushed the boundaries. And we were not afraid to push the boundary because the city cared about helping the people a lot more than someone's going to come and slap us in the hand, you know, HUD or the Treasury, hey, you didn't get it quite right. It was more important for us to say we prevented someone from being homeless than to say, oh yeah, HUD gave us the #1 award for program design. So that's why Texas Housers identifying us as an efficient program means a lot more than getting an award from HUD. Thank you. I think I can pass it on to a fellow San Antonian as well. Yeah. Greg, you want to go next?
Yes. Thanks so much, Vero. It's an honor to join the panelists and the speakers today and to speak with this cohort of advocates from across the country. My name is Greg Zlotnick. As the slide says, I direct the pro bono programs at the School of Law at St. Mary's University here in San Antonio, located within our Center for Legal and Social Justice. And over the past, well, almost year and a half now, responding to the COVID-induced housing crisis has been one of the priorities of our pro bono programs, as well as our consumer protection clinic, led by Professor Genevieve Fajardo. And I just wanted to offer, as Vero said, it's hard to top the great detail and the thoroughness of the report and slides that Aaron has put back for visuals. So just going to offer a few other insights and echo and co-sign much of what Vero has said, and just from a slightly different perspective within a broader collaborative effort here in San Antonio. The first thing I want to offer is that in addition to what Vero mentioned in terms of having an infrastructure in place, albeit not necessarily one that anticipated a pandemic-induced housing crisis across our community, but having a coalition in place of advocates, residents, of city, of nonprofits that was working towards housing mitigation and rental and mortgage assistance. There was also a similar infrastructure in place around right to counsel, which may, in terms of its title, invoke when evictions, when housing crises move into the courtroom. But really, the work of an advocate and the work of attorneys and legal advocates in this space can be even more effective before it ever reaches the courtroom. And so, by having been convened by NLIHC here in the city of San Antonio, with other legal services providers like Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, San Antonio Legal Services Association, and other advocates in the community, there was already a framework in place of folks working in and around the housing space to keep people housed and figuring out how best to not only intervene early, connect residents with the resources that are available, but also how to mitigate harm so that folks aren't ending up houseless or without shelter. And that framework, that sort of collaborative framework, I think has yielded a lot of successful results. During the pandemic, our Center for Legal and Social Justice stood up a housing hotline where folks could call in to just ask questions. And sometimes it would be as open-ended as, what's the latest with the CDC moratorium? What's this I hear about the courts being open or not open? And sometimes with very specific situations to them. Hi, my lease, I'm behind on rental payment. I got a notice to vacate. What should I do? And so over the course of responding to hundreds and hundreds of calls this past year and working in collaboration with our partners in the legal aid community, it has been our experience that folks that have been behind on rent here within the city of San Antonio who are eligible for the city of San Antonio's emergency housing assistance programs have seen the fastest results in being able to access rental assistance, to being able to maintain housing stability, or to be able to relocate in a way that was least burdensome for them. Through our hotline and with the benefit of the internet, our hotline was able to reach folks in other parts of the state as well, not only outside of the city limits of San Antonio, but in other regions of Texas. And I would say anecdotally, though, of course, of many anecdotes, that level of responsiveness and cohesion has not been present in some of those communities as it is here in San Antonio. Another insight that I think illustrates the spirit of acting quickly, being creative, working in collaboration, and being respectful across the boundaries, no matter one's identity as a renter, as an advocate, as a city or governmental official, actually comes very recently, comes from this past weekend. Two of our local council members organized a drive-up clinic to assist with rental assistance as well as legal information and advice. They located it at one of the district offices on the west side of San Antonio, and representatives from the School of Law, from the pro bono programs, from our consumer protection clinic, from Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, from San Antonio Legal Services Association, and from Vero's department, from a Neighborhood Housing Services Department, were all on hand to help out, to help answer questions. And I think that sort of work being done, shoulder to shoulder with some and with masks on and outdoors with sunscreen on as well to help withstand the Texas summer, shows the level of not only dedication, but the kind of responsiveness in meeting people where they are in not only the broader San Antonio community, but within neighborhoods in the communities that might be most vulnerable to housing insecurity. And then lastly, which I think builds off of, really builds off of that sense of meeting people where they are, is using all the tools at the disposal of the community. Not only using the infrastructure that had been in place pre-pandemic to build it out and to pivot, whether within the city government, within organizations like our own Center for Legal and Social Justice, or within the advocate community, but seeing, sometimes, restrictions and guidelines can be the generators of creativity. And so one of the, from our perspective, one of the tools we have been trying to use is looking not only at the CDC moratorium and guidance and declarations that are available, but looking at state and local guidance to see where can there be tools to give residents more time to find rental assistance, more time to find another place to live, more time simply to make sure that they are able to obtain and secure and continue to secure safe and stable housing. So whether that was a new Texas Supreme Court order that in many ways clarified an abatement process for landlords and tenants who were pursuing rental assistance through the statewide Texas eviction diversion program, or even just this afternoon, a new order from the local administrative judge here in Bexar County that oversees not only the district courts and the county courts, but the justice of the peace courts where evictions take place in the state of Texas, issuing a new order suspending all jury trials going forward, seeing that as a potential tool as well. While Texas is not necessarily does not necessarily have the friendliest code when it comes to renters facing eviction, it does allow renters or tenants, or either party for that matter, the right to request a jury trial. And so now we're thinking about, if much the same way we're thinking about layers of protection when it comes to preventing COVID infection, we can think of the layers of protection when it comes to preventing eviction. So we've got our early responses with rental assistance. We've got the ability to connect tenants and residents with representation to make sure that due process is carried out in the courts. And we even have temporary orders that tenants can take advantage of to, again, extend that deadline, to invoke the suspension of jury trials, request a jury trial if something has proceeded that far, and wait until it is safe again to return to court. And in the interim time, either seek additional rental assistance or find relocation assistance as well. Thinking about all of that, one of the other just in conclusion, one of the other programs we operate, our Center for Legal and Social Justice, is a form of outreach with folks who are unhoused here in San Antonio. And so the fact that we've been able to work in collaboration across our city and across different sectors to mitigate the possibility for many folks of entering homelessness, experiencing homelessness, has been very gratifying. So we're thankful for all our partners for their continued work.
Thank you so much, Greg. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us. And so last but certainly not least, we're going to hear from Erin Barbie from Dream Key Partners in North Carolina. Erin, I'll turn it to you.
Kim, thank you so much. And I'm very excited to be a part of this panel today. And I've already learned so much that I'll be taking back to my own community. So as Kim said, my name is Erin Barbie, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Programs and Fund Development at Dream Key Partners in Charlotte, North Carolina. Our organization is a medium-sized nonprofit. We have about 35 full-time employees, and our primary focus is on the development of affordable housing, both single and multifamily, and also helping people on their pathway to home ownership and programs through education, housing counseling, and down payment assistance. But in 2020, our charter changed and shifted as it did for many of you. We've never dealt in emergency services, but in our community, we didn't have an organization that was able to raise their hand immediately and say, we can help administer the funds. And so our organization did just that. And we created in 3 weeks an online program that would help us to administer the funds to the most vulnerable populations that were identified in 2020. The program was bumpy. It was bumpy for all of us because we certainly didn't have all of the guidance that we do right now, but we were able to push out over $23 million in 2020 and help over 6,000 families. And we learned a great deal about this program as we moved into 2021. Next slide, please. In 2020-21, we again partnered with the City of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County. We received $24 million from the City of Charlotte and $6.7 million from the county. We were given some different timeframes in which we were expected to administer those funds. For the city, we have until September 30th of 2021. And for Mecklenburg County, they gave us an extremely short window from April 14th through June 30th to administer $6.7 million. For all of us, we're able to administer the rent and utility assistance, as well as for those who are in a hotel. And we had some territory challenges as we had to only administer to the City of Charlotte within city limits. And in Mecklenburg County, we had to deal with townships and unincorporated areas. And then we had this new layer that everyone has been dealing with, which is landlords applying on behalf of tenants. Next slide, please. For the purposes of this conversation, I felt that it was important that I talked about the challenges and hurdles that we faced as we administered our program. On the surface level, these are challenges that I'm sure all of you have seen or have experienced, but I'm going to talk about them in a little bit more depth. So these are the top 5 that I would say keep us up at night. They keep me up at night. And the first is really reaching the most vulnerable populations. So we've been highly successful with administering our funds to those who are at 50% AMI and below, and ensuring that we're measuring those who are at 30% AMI and below as well. So we considered vulnerable to be those who are at risk of homelessness, who are at 30% or 50% AMI, and who lived in certain areas of Charlotte. But what I recognized is that the most vulnerable are the people that we weren't reaching. They were the ones that weren't even on our radar. And those were the ones that were living in hotels at their permanent residence, or those who were in transient situations, such as those living in single room occupancies. And when we dug deep into the most vulnerable, we recognized that our method of delivery, our accessibility, wasn't what it needed to be. Having a wonderful, accessible online application that's you're able to use on an iPad or a phone just wasn't enough. And with the barriers of COVID, we weren't able to be in person. And so we had to address this head on. How could we really impact the most vulnerable and be with them? And additionally, in those populations, we recognize there's a high level of mental health challenges present in our hotels. And my team wasn't well equipped to manage that and navigate those waters. So we needed to begin to look into how we address it. The second challenge that we've started to see is reaching populations from different cultures. From 2020 into 2021, we perfected having an English and a Spanish application and making sure that we had translation services. But what we recognized as we started to do listening sessions in other cultural spaces is that what we didn't have was trust. In Charlotte, we have a high population of Vietnamese and Burmese and Ethiopian and immigrants, newcomers in our community, and who needed this program, who were being adversely impacted by COVID-19, but they didn't know Dream Key Partners. They didn't have trust in the federal system. And so as a result, this population was being more impacted by COVID-19 and the eviction moratorium, all of these factors, than our populations that we generally focused on. And so again, we had to look to community partners in order to really impact and build trust and earn trust in those areas. And you'll hear a theme from me about community partners. The next was documentation challenges, something that we've talked about over and over again on this call. But for us, our documentation challenges weren't just the actual documents that we needed in order to approve someone for the program, but ensuring that people understood the most basic documents like an ID. How do they get that uploaded? And what we recognized is that taking a picture on your phone or going to the library or uploading it on your personal computer wasn't something that everyone had access to. And we needed to think more creatively about how we would obtain documentation, considering that none of us are in the office, still aren't in the office, and mailing something in was a challenge. So we turned to community partners in order to address this, which I can talk about later. The next area was effectively partnering with other organizations who were doing similar work. What I recognized that a lot of our team members were having to spend a lot of time on duplication of benefits because they were trying to decipher where they got a few funds from here, a few funds from there, and we were all working in silos. We recognized that we needed to, as a community, shift our model to a community impact model and making sure that, a collective impact model, and making sure that we were talking with one another more frequently to say, okay, on the back end, how can we exchange information and data so that it doesn't adversely impact the tenant and have them go back and forth in order to gain access to funds? That was probably one of our most effective routes. And last but not least, something that sure keeps all of us up at night is managing and prioritizing evictions. So August 1st through August 3rd is going to become a very important set of dates for us as we manage those who were served evictions that are not protected, and for those that were already in the pipeline who are ready to receive assistance, and ensuring that we get the money out as fast as possible. We've addressed this by changing our priorities. We have 5 priorities now, and anyone that has an eviction notice and they have a court date within 90 days is someone that we're going to pay within 24 to 48 hours using self-attestation. For everyone else, we prioritized right after that in order to administer the funds quickly. Next slide, please. So where are we today? As of August 1st in Charlotte, we have administered $16.2 million of our ERA1 funds, and we still have 7.8 remaining. Within Mecklenburg County, we did meet that very difficult deadline, and we exhausted all $6.7 million of the ERA1 funds, which was 100% of the funds that the county had. We now have ERA2 funds in play for the county that began on August 1st, and that's another $5.3 million, with another $26 million coming down the pike from the state. We're happy about the way that we're moving funds, but again, those things that keep me up at night, keep my team up at night, are the things that we're grappling with. On average, we push out about $250,000 to $300,000 a day, and we'd like to increase that to hopefully $500,000 as we move through this new time with evictions that people are facing. So I'll conclude there, and thank you so much for having me.
Awesome, thank you so much, Erin. And congratulations to you and Veronica for getting all of that funding out. That is absolutely phenomenal. So we are going to see, and if our panelists can stick around for an extra 10 minutes to do a little bit of an extended Q&A, that would be wonderful, but of course, want to respect everyone's time. But we're going to jump right into our Q&A. We've gotten a lot of wonderful questions for our panelists. So first up, how has the use of data directly impacted program implementation and course correction? And I think that can be for anyone. Veronica, please.
Hi. So again, I mentioned how our city manager had wanted us to use data even before the pandemic as we're developing programs or reporting on programs. One of the ways in which we used data was to see how long it was taking us to process a payment so that we could figure out where the holdup was. And what we did was we matched the applicants to the date they had submitted, to when we issued payment, and we tracked where the holdup was. So very much like a Lean Six Sigma kind of approach, but looking at comparing like all the applicants that came in the first 3 months, we were able to see like, here's the holdup, that's where we have to change a process, change how we do this. One of the things we did is we kept, of course, all the information of everyone who's applied. So we use the same technology to issue out a survey to tell people what could have been better. Would you recommend the program? Did you get all the assistance you needed? So we issued a survey, and we sent it to about like 30,000 people, because we sent it to the tenants who had applied, everyone who had been approved, rejected, all the landlords, because we had a lot of the landlord information. We had their numbers, we had their emails. So we pushed through text the survey, And we used that survey to refine our program to make it even simpler. And so we did that survey in December of last year. So by the time we got our ERA 1 money in the beginning of the year, we had already made our system even better. And so we used the data of the clients themselves to further streamline our process. And that's when, you know, we went all in with self-attestation. We already were accepting that, but we're like, for anything, let's use it. And so we constantly looked at that data. We also looked at the data from the eviction courts. So as soon as the eviction courts opened up, we sent a team paid out of CARES funds, the CARES CDBG CV funding for those interested. And we send people, legal services are there as well. So the partnership with legal services providers helps. And we're tracking all the evictions, something that had never been done in our community. And so our team is the one that is tracking all the eviction filings, what kind of judgments they are. Of course, we're tracking our success as doing our own interventions, but we're using that data. So of course, on Monday, my first question, you know, in our team meeting was, how are the eviction filings? What are they doing? Compare that graph against the graphs of applications. Are we seeing an uptick? And so we're going to be able to surge up our staffing if we see both numbers tick up. And we've already alerted the city manager, my boss, hey, we need to be ready in case we see this uptick, that we need more staffing, so be ready to approve more temp staff or more outreach. And so we're using data now, like every day. It's only been 3 days, but every day I'm looking at applications and eviction data and letting the city manager know, tomorrow I need these people, or next week I need to send these folks out to the field. So that's one way we're using data in our program every day.
Awesome. Thank you, Veronica. And Erin, I see you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. So we're actually doing many of the things that Vero just talked about. I'll add just a couple of things and how we use our data. So because we had a lot of the data from 2020 and 2021, we did a deep dive into the demographics of who we serve, not only to look at the gaps, but also to look at locations where we knew that there were higher numbers of those who were living in poverty and lower number of applications, so that we could target our marketing to those areas. But what we found as we were digging into our data, that we primarily serve a very specific kind of person. And it was an African-American female with 1 to 2 children between the ages of 25 and 36. And what that did for us was helped us to understand some of the challenges that demographic goes through, so that we could target our marketing. We know that they're younger. We needed to use more social media. We needed to use more targeted outreach, not just traditional things like the radio and television. We talked about TikTok, interestingly enough, as an option for how we reach that population and help them understand what the program is. And then also, we recognized that I needed to shift the times in which my team members were working, to have some people who were in nights and weekends in order to work with that population a bit more effectively. Once we did that, we did see a tide turn a little bit for how many people were able to successfully get their applications in. And then lastly, I'll mention from a courts perspective, I know Vero's team is working with the court system as well, but so we sent in a team of researchers to look at the 2,600 notices that were going out on August 2nd to people who were in the eviction pipeline, and to look at the trends. We wanted to know exactly where the largest population was being impacted by zip code, and narrow it all the way down to property managers and specific apartment complex owners, because we also are starting to see a trend that there are some apartment groups that are evicting more than others, and that we weren't aware of. And we're able to work with our mediation services to directly impact that group, and not just continue to be out there saying, let me help everybody with an eviction, but let's talk to the ones that are really serving those evictions more than others. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Erin, too, about like figuring out who is responsible for a lot of these evictions and then targeting assistance there. Greg and Erin, I wanted to give you all a chance to pipe in if there's anything that you wanted to add to that. All right. Cool. We will move right along. So one of the big barriers that we hear a lot from program administrators is that fear of crossing any kind of a guidance that Treasury has set out. So a lot of folks are afraid of having their funding clawed back by Treasury. And so our question for you all is, how do you balance those potential risks with the need to be person-centered and flexible with your program administration?
I'm happy to start there. So early on in 2020, when we recognized that guidelines were a bit loose at that time, we formed a bi-weekly meeting with several parties. So we have our City of Charlotte who's at the table, legal, our compliance team, all of these team members come together and we talk very openly about some of the challenges we're having, but also how regulations have changed and shifted. And so because of that, I can bring specific instances about the challenges that tenants are having, and we're going to have immediate agreement from all parties that make those decisions. So we are an entity that administers the program on behalf of the City of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County. And so they are the ones that are the recipients of the ERA funds, and then we're the subrecipient. So as a result, we both have skin in the game. And so by having this biweekly meeting and being on the same page about some of the risks, then we're able to move and be flexible with one another versus us just making a decision and helping everybody and then it coming back to bite us later. Now, we have been in conversation about some safe harbor opportunities, right, that we've been trying to talk to Treasury about and advocate for. But until that happens, we believe that the risk is far outweighed by the help that we're offering.
Awesome. Thank you, Erin. And Veronica, go right ahead.
So for us, in terms of outcomes and being flexible, that has just helped us get the money out the door more quickly. And so, yes, we too were concerned about potential fraud, but we had to balance that against the need. And so we did flag items. We did develop a special team if we suspected some fraud as well. So we did additional digging, but for us, again, it was about getting the help quickly to the folks that needed it. And so that became more important than, oh, there could be fraud. And so it was, you know, what we valued as more important. And so it just helped us get the money out the door more quickly. And that was fine because that was our goal.
Awesome, thank you. And anything else our other panelists wanted to add? All right, cool. And Erin, just to your point too about advocating with Treasury for safe harbor provisions, NLIHC is also working with Treasury to try to get those provisions instilled so that, you know, programs can get that money out as fast as possible to those who need it the most. So, you know, keeping our fingers crossed that something comes through. And thank you for all of the advocacy that you're doing on that as well. It takes all of us doing collective action to make an impact. So thank you. So we had a question from the chat. Do you have best practices about identification requirements? Requiring all adults to have a photo ID is one barrier in my jurisdiction. It seems programs are so concerned about fraud, like we were just talking about, that it's slowing down ERA dollars out to landlords and tenants.
I mean, it's pretty straightforward for us. We're not going to, as long as the primary applicant has provided us with an adequate ID and we can see that and match it up on the lease, the utility bill, all of those things, we are not going to wait around for the third or fourth person who's in the household above 18 to provide an ID. When we did do that, it completely brought our program to a halt, and those people did not get the funds that they needed. So we're most concerned about having that on file for the primary applicant. Beyond that, it's almost like icing on a cake, right? I was like, oh, we got this, great. But again, to Vero's point, to my point, we just need to get the money out the door and make sure that we can tie it back to the right person.
Definitely, thank you. And Vero, I saw that you unmuted, so wanted to give you the chance in case there's anything you wanted. Okay, great.
Same, Erin got it.
Perfect. Greg, go right ahead.
I would just add, there may be an opportunity to, if you're running if you're in a community where there is perhaps more of an emphasis placed on dotting, a particular I or crossing a particular T when it comes to identification, there can be ways, there may be community organizations or projects that are dedicated to assisting folks. And I think nationwide could be up to as many as 11% of folks don't have a state issued ID. That could be another way to bring them into coalition to really focus on, okay, if we're having trouble opening this particular door without this, with this particular key, let's see if we can at least get some keys in people's hands to do that. And it can actually be something where attorneys can assist with as well. Many jurisdictions will allow attorneys to make requests on behalf of clients for identifying documents. It's not a heavy lift. I always say we do something like this at our office. I always say I'm not filing an amicus brief or, appearing before an appellate court, knock on wood, but it's a very high return on the attorney's time investment.
Great, thank you, Greg. So next we have another question from the chat. What are the most important strategies in reaching small landlords?
So that continues to be a challenge for us. What we are trying right now is going through the apartment association in San Antonio. So we have the San Antonio Apartment Association, Sabres, our real estate board, and we found just a few months ago that there's another organization, I forget the name, but it is geared towards those small landlords. So we're having conversations with them about it. We just hosted a webinar on information. We focused it on landlords to let them know what, the moratorium's coming to an end, what are the resources, because this program, even though it's geared to help the tenants, it really is helping the landlords as well, because they get the money they need to keep their business going. But we also let them know, hey, by the way, here's the tenants' rights, and here's what you're supposed to do when you file an eviction. And the city added a notice of tenants' rights to any eviction filing as well. So we said, and remind you that if you choose to file an eviction, you also have this requirement if you're in the city limits. So we wanted to make it as a resource. So we're supposed to have a debriefing that I'm missing right now, but the team's got it, with them about it. And so we're gonna specifically ask about that. How do we get the word out to those smaller landlords? But we're going with the business associations to try and do that. But the best has been other landlords telling their peers. That has really been the best. They say, hey, it worked, I got my check. And so that has really, word of mouth has been so useful for both the landlords and the tenants.
And in Charlotte, we're very blessed to have an organization called Social Serve, which is actually a national organization that's based in Charlotte, and they hold our landlord consortium. And so small and large landlords alike are a part of that, and mainly those who have affordable housing offerings. And so what we've done is we've done several outreach opportunities to those in the landlord consortium. We've talked with the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association as well. But through Social Serve, we've been able to do direct mail and email blasts to those small landlords. And I know that many of the states represented here today have Social Serve in their communities, and you could work directly with them to get the information out. So that would be a direct action takeaway.
Awesome, thank you both. So just the last couple questions in our few remaining minutes. What strategies have been most successful in reducing barriers and documentation for undocumented populations?
I can talk a little bit about our partnerships. So I mentioned that we expanded who our stakeholders are. So we included all those immigrant advocacy organizations that were not on my Rolodex, if you will. But they became our partners because they were concerned about their clients. And so we asked them to actually become our outreach arm. We contracted with a few of them. There's an organization in San Antonio called Domésticas Unidas. They actually work with domestic workers and around workers' rights and making sure they get paid and not get, don't skip out on their payments, right? But because of the pandemic and this program, they became one of the organizations that we contracted with so they could do application intake. And I went, you know, I'm a Spanish speaker, so I went with them couple Saturday events where I helped them do in-person intake. I helped to answer questions, train the trainer kind of thing. And so again, trusted, grassroots, known organizations were the best way to reduce those barriers. People didn't trust the city, and especially undocumented folks. I went on all the media, all the Univision and the Telemundo to do media. We got, the city has an office of immigrant rights. So that person, he also went on media, and we stressed, you know, you don't have to be documented to access the funds. Anytime I do Spanish media, I mention that. We don't care about your documented status. The money's here to help you. And so that messaging is there, but really it was those trusted grassroots organizations that people already work with who were the most effective. And we trusted them and we gave them money to do the application intake, and they're still doing it for us and doing a great job.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Any other panelists want to jump in on that?
No, that's an excellent plan, and we do many of the same things.
Awesome. So final question before I turn it back over to Sarah to close us out. With all of this great information, if folks are living in an area where their ERA program is not taking into consideration all of these best practices that you all have been talking about, how would you suggest that they advocate for ERA programs to adapt some of these best practices?
Yeah, so within our community, we actually did have some groups that felt that we weren't doing the best job in full transparency, and I loved their approach. So they contacted us directly, and they also worked with the city and the county to say, can we set up a meeting so we can have a better understanding about how the program is being administered, where are some of the gaps, and why we're not seeing fill in the blank. And I appreciated that, because public knowledge is important, but also transparency is important. And they did it in a way that gave us the opportunity to sit across from one another at a table and have a conversation. Additionally, I would talk to our local city council and the county commission, because they're the ones that say where the funds are going to go, and express your concerns. Talk to your the person who is in your district and say, listen, my people need help, and you're an advocate. We put you in office for a reason. Help us to advocate for what it is that we need, and they can oftentimes help move the ball forward. So those are two suggestions that I would have.
Wonderful, thank you, Erin. Any other panelists want to share their thoughts on that before we close out? All right, cool. Oh, Greg, go ahead.
Oh, I would just add that's as a sort of on the other end of the spectrum of compiling data and best practices, share specific examples, whether it's with, as Erin said, with county or public who are directing the funds, or even with other voices in the community that can amplify that, bring it home, not as a large abstraction or as in something that is community-wide, but sometimes that individual story has a way of capturing folks' attention and moving things forward in a direction that would be best to benefit the larger group of folks.
Wonderful, thank you, Greg. All right, so with that, I want to thank our wonderful panelists. I want to thank Rebecca and Claire for sharing all of the information that they shared earlier. And I will turn it back over to Sarah to close this out. Thank you all so much.
Great, thank you all so much. And thank you, Kim, for doing such a fabulous job moderating that panel and all of that wonderful information. So great, and thanks for our participants. This was a wonderful, informative chat, and so much great information went through it. We will try to capture it and get it out to you guys in the notes, because there was a lot of great information sharing in there. So quickly, our next webinar is next week, August 11th, same time and day of the week. And we're going to be focused next week on preventive, connecting emergency rental assistance to courts and tenant protections, where we'll have a great lineup of speakers as always. You'll see here Christine Snowman from United States Department of Justice, Zachary Zarno from the National Center for State Courts, Jay Rose from Wind Companies, Webb Brewer from Memphis and Shelby County Emergency Rental Assistance Program, and Greg Payne from Maine Housing Coalition, and possibly a few more. So it will be a rich, great conversation. We'll really focus on connecting to state and local court systems. So thank you so much for joining us today, for all of your great and amazing participation, and have a wonderful rest of your week. And we will see you next week. Take care.